You have arrived at our channel. The world is in disbelief at the news of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's deaths at their Santa Fe, New Mexico, home. Hollywood star Gene Hackman suffered unimaginable betrayal at the hands of people closest to him, despite his legendary roles and widespread adoration. His abusive father silently abandoned his family. Unfortunately, his mom didn't live to see her son become a Hollywood star. Norman Gary, his best buddy, committed suicide after giving in to his misery, not to mention the countless other heartbreaking tales that have gone untold. Still, Hackman kept going even when things got tough. He fought life no matter his age with power, passion, and an unwavering will. His life is a testament to overcoming adversity, perseverance, and an unbreakable will, and it culminates in the tragic death of a star. Get ready to hear the story of a guy who faced abandonment head-on, but ultimately triumphed. He was a Hollywood icon, and he commanded the screen. Still, Gene Hackman walked away silently, abandoning a tragedy that remains unresolved. Tragically, he and his wife Betsy Arakawa passed away at their Santa Fe, New Mexico, home. This news shook the world and left many wondering about what happened. On that tragic day, a worried neighbor contacted the authorities upon seeing the pair had been missing for quite some time. Hackman and Betsy were found dead in different rooms when the authorities arrived. Out of their 3 canines, one was discovered lifeless and the other 2 were found alive. Nobody saw that serene existence coming to an end in such terrifying isolation. It was enough to send shivers down their spines. The audience was deeply disturbed by the response of one of Gene's 3 children. The family is still waiting for formal conclusions regarding the couple's cause of death, according to Leslie and Hackman, 58, who spoke to the press. The couple's passing was a mystery. Their stepmother and father might have died of carbon monoxide poisoning, according to Leslie and Elizabeth Gene Hackman, who thought there might have been a gas leak. The notion was convincing, but the investigators couldn't find any proof of a leak of this kind. The official investigation states that Gene Hackman and his wife had probably died a few days prior, since their remains had signs of decay. Regarding her father's health, Leslie said there had been no warning signs before he passed away. She said he was in excellent health despite his advanced years, and that he hadn't had any significant surgery recently. He maintained a healthy lifestyle thanks to his love of Pilates and yoga and his regular workouts. Leslie said that she was not overly shocked by the death of her father, who was already 95 years old, which was even more shocking than the world's horror at the news of the great Gene Hackman and his wife's loss. She was living in California when her father, who was very reclusive, went months without communicating with her. We were inseparable. I hadn't had any communication with them for a while, but she assured me that everything was fine. Leslie has promised not to go to New Mexico until the police have finished their investigation. Therefore, she has not done so yet. Leslie and her sister were seen at a Denny's in Burbank, California, on February 27th, eating together and seeming calm and happy. The photographs were reportedly shot very immediately after the children learned of their parents' deaths, as reported by the Daily Mail. Even though the inquiry could take months, a caring daughter would probably rush to the spot, look it over, and start making funeral arrangements. She opted for an alternative instead. Tim Hackman, who is also Grandpa Hackman, spoke up as well. He disclosed that, out of all the family members, only Leslie kept in touch with Gene Hackman, and even then, their communication was limited to once every few months. At Tim's father's funeral 11 years ago, that was the last time Tim saw Gene Hackman. In his last years, Gene Hackman apparently opted for, or was doomed to spend time alone, cut off from his loved ones and closest friends. Is he free to choose his own path, or was he doomed to spend eternity alone? A newspaper renowned for paying sources to exploit explosive news, the Daily Mail, bought the exclusive story that Leslie offered to them. People are wondering if she is really mourning her father's death because of this. Alternately, was she trying to gain attention by focusing on the tragedy? Would a daughter who is truly grieving consider selling her narrative at the moment her father's death is being announced? No ordinary man was Hackman. He was born into poverty, yet he lived his life with an iron will and never gave up. But as his voyage came to a close, he died quietly, a tragic twist of fate. In the absence of those he cared about, Hackman opted for a low-key existence in Santa Fe, New Mexico, after departing Hollywood in 2004. He and Betsy avoided the spotlight, and lived a simple life away from Hollywood. Just an old man looking for some quiet in his latter years. No more wild celebrations, no more paparazzi. It might not have been the tranquility he had anticipated, though. By 2023, he had vanished. Having lunch at a nearby eatery with Betsy, the old man in the pictures was weak, but yet looked like he'd been in warfare. Neither his relatives nor the youngsters who had gathered at his bedside wept in sorrow. Just a man who had been strong in the past, but no one was around to see him take his last breath. Some of his closest friends and family members left him, and he himself distanced himself from others. More than just a Hollywood legend came to an end with Gene Hackman's passing. For a guy who had suffered too much loss, it was the last evidence of his extreme isolation. Did he ultimately let fate decide his fate, or did he have some say in the matter? Without stability and love, Gene Hackman's childhood was a tumultuous one. His dad, Eugene Ezra Hackman, was a printer for newspapers. However, the family had to relocate quite a bit due to his precarious employment. Hackman had a rocky connection with his father since his dad was a strong disciplinarian who frequently used physical force. Because of the stifling atmosphere at home, sensitive and defiant young Hackman took refuge in the basement, where he made himself a safe haven. A devastating incident rocked Hackman's world when he was 13 years old. Without saying a word, his father abruptly left the home. While Hackman and his pals were playing at the end of the street one morning, Hackman noticed his father driving by and waved. That was Hackman's final encounter with him, and the memory of that fateful meeting lingered with him forever. Hackman couldn't hold back his emotions when asked about the experience on an episode of Inside the Actor's Studio from 2001 by James Lipton. He admitted it was a challenging remembrance. "I was playing with some boys at the end of the street when he drove past and waved," he said. After Lipton brought up the possibility that he had seen his father again after that, Hackman did little more than nod silently, suppressing his emotions. The disciplinarian and violent disciplinarian who had been his sole rock, despite his severity, had suddenly disappeared. In Danville, Illinois, Hackman and his brother were abandoned by their grandma and left to live with their mother. Unfortunately, Hackman never felt completely embraced by his grandmother, who exhibited icy disdain and emotional neglect. Although Gene Hackman emerged from his ordeals a strong-willed and tough person, he also carried a lifetime feeling of abandonment and rebelliousness. But that was just the start. Hackman would face more hardship in the years ahead, and occasionally he would even be the one to cause the tempests that had shaken his existence. As far as Hackman was concerned, no one in his family had ever supported his acting career more than his mother. She encouraged him, seeing his talent, and told him he could make it as an actor. Unfortunately, their familial coldness and emotional distance persisted despite their devotion, particularly considering his mother's battles with alcoholism and life's challenges. Tragic events occurred in 1962. The house fire that killed Hackman's mother was terrible. She was so drunk that she fell asleep with a lighted cigarette, which caused the fire to start and swiftly spread throughout the house. It wasn't simply losing his mother that affected Hackman. It was the crushing disappointment of knowing she would never see the fruition of his labor. She would never get to witness her son achieve the fame and fortune she had dreamed of for him, since the one person who had ever believed in him had died. "I Never Sang for My Father" is the one picture that Hackman would recommend to his mother, even though he hardly discussed this tragedy in public. The movie was a reflection of his life. Bereavement Tales. Gene Garrison, played by Hackman, is a son navigating a tumultuous relationship with his aging father while yearning for acceptance and love. In addition to reflecting Hackman's actual conflicts with his father, it was an emotional encounter with feelings he had carried around with him all his life. The film mirrored Hackman's real life in that it chronicled a quest to overcome emotional deprivation and find love and acceptance, items that he had experienced a lack of during his formative years. It was never simple to obtain affection, and Hackman conveyed the profound anguish of unresolved hurt and unfulfilled need for it in the film. "I Never Sang for My Father" is available for streaming on sites like Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Hulu, as well as for renting on services like Google Play Movies and Apple TV, so you can learn more about the hidden depths of Gene Hackman's turbulent existence. Because his grandmother was emotionally distant and his mother had died, Hackman grew up feeling abandoned and lonely. He longed for love, but it never came. The reality, though, was that he couldn't let himself be consumed by those wounds. The untimely death of Hackman's best friend, Norman Gary, came as yet another heartbreaking blow in the years that followed. Because he knew he could trust Gary in times of need, Hackman had taken comfort in their friendship. Still, Hackman faced a terrible reality in addition to the loss of a close friend when Gary decided to end his life in 1982. His closest friends and family abandoned him time and time again. In addition to being a dear friend, Norman Gary was a famous and highly esteemed entertainment lawyer. He was someone Hackman had complete faith in and relied on for all of his legal needs and contract negotiations. Everyone thought Gary had it all: his unwavering commitment, his knack for handling tricky circumstances, and everything else imaginable. Underneath his professional achievement, nevertheless, were mysterious financial difficulties. His untimely demise not only caused Hackman immense sorrow, but also inflicted persistent uncertainties. Never stopped asking himself what he could have done to stop the disaster. More than merely sorrowful loss, Gary's passing was a tragedy. A huge hole appeared in Hackman's life as a result. And because the financial problems were never solved, it left Hackman with a lot of unsolved questions and led to suspicion. As a result of the unending stream of losses he had experienced since infancy, he began to emotionally withdraw and found more fulfillment in his career than in his interactions with others. However, not every setback results in a loss. Because of his innate survival instincts, which he developed from a lifetime of hardship, Hackman decided to confront his suffering by devoting himself fully to his profession. Acting was his outlet, and he took on role after role, not to run away from his feelings, but to save himself from drowning in loneliness. Through all that toil, Hackman found the strength to channel his sorrow into inspiration, giving performances that would go down in history as some of his most moving. Achieving 2 Oscar nominations and solidifying his name in Hollywood, his unfaltering commitment highlighted his indisputable brilliance and charisma on screen. It would be reasonable to assume that fate would finally provide him with relief after the devastating loss of his best buddy to suicide. Unfortunately, such was not the case. Immediate marital strife descended like a tempest. Immersed in his work, Hackman moved from set to set and city to city, filming constantly. Faye, his wife, and their children become increasingly absent from his life. His appearance at family gatherings became rare, and the frequency of his phone calls home decreased. You yearn for recognition your whole life, and when it comes, it's difficult to say no. Fame, fortune, and temptation. It's all too much for a poor boy like me to refuse, Hackman confessed in an interview with the New York Times in 1989. The gap between them had widened into an insurmountable abyss, despite the patience of Faye Maltus. They finalized their divorce in 1986 following 30 years of matrimony. It was a low-key divorce for Hackman's first marriage. No arguments, no conflicts. Little more than the lingering remorse of a man who came to terms with his loss far too late. I was away from him for too long, Hackman said sadly in an interview with GQ when asked about any advice he would give his kid. What I can provide is no guidance. Was this conclusion predetermined by fate, or was he free to choose it? Success at the expense of family was just not worth it. It was too late for him to realize it. With sadness and resentment. Even though he didn't set out on this road, it appeared like destiny had other plans for him, leading him into a life of isolation where he was ultimately completely by himself. A man whose intensity reached well beyond the realm of film. Gene Hackman was more than simply a Hollywood legend. Outside of acting, speed was one of his biggest loves. He found solace in racing as a hobby, a refuge from the intense pressures of fame. In the late 1970s, Hackman became enamored with racing after becoming a member of the Sports Car Club of America. This was a highly competitive group of amateur and professional racers who all shared a love for speed. However, Hackman continued beyond amateur contests. He immersed himself in more significant happenings. In 1983, he achieved a notable milestone by taking part in the challenging 24 Hours of Daytona. Very few people can say that they had the opportunity to not only compete, but also to drive a Toyota for the squad of the renowned racer Dan Gurney. Proving he wasn't content to merely participate, he went on to claim victory in the Long Beach Grand Prix Celebrity Race. But win or lose, there was risk. On the track, Hackman experienced several terrifying moments. He was driving a state-of-the-art Audi Quattro, which was a racing car of its time, during the 6-hour endurance race at Sears Point Raceway. The automobile went down in the middle of the race when the brakes locked up. The accident served as a sobering reminder that speed is inherently dangerous, though luckily Hackman was unharmed. He was being characteristically clever when he later quipped about how he should have brought a stunt double for that scene. Outside of the track, his passion for automobiles was unbridled. The strong character and ever-changing taste of Hackman were on full display in his private collection. The very car he raced in contests in the 1980s and 1990s was a Toyota Celica GT, which he owned. Over time, his collection grew to encompass a wide array of the most captivating and fashionable automobiles on the market. Infiniti QX50, an American symbol of speed and performance, a Mercedes E-Class that strikes a balance between comfort and class, a Ford Mustang Shelby that combines power and luxury, and a Tesla Model S that shows his admiration for technology and the future of cars. It was more than just a show of money. His collection was an expression of his soul. Each vehicle was a window into a unique period of his life. Although Hackman loved racing with all his heart, he had to put his health first and retire from the sport at some point. There was little wiggle space in a sport that required split-second reactions, and he was the first to confess that getting older had damaged his reflexes. According to what Hackman previously remarked, you need to keep your reflexes sharp and stop when they begin to diminish. Your thoughts turn to old age, and you come to the realization that you need to prioritize your own care more. Making that choice was not easy. It demonstrated his practicality. He had a graceful understanding of his limitations and was a man who knew them. Gene Hackman's passion for racing demonstrated that he was more than just an actor. He was an unflinching competitor who welcomed danger and velocity with the same fervor he displayed in his films. As a means of demonstrating his resiliency in all aspects of life, racing was more than simply a hobby for him. However, Hackman's unconventional choices and lifestyle never stopped surprising people, even as he grew older. Hackman was steadfast in his devotion to a Toyota Tundra, in contrast to many Hollywood stars who relished in acquiring rare and costly supercars. A sturdy, powerful, and dependable truck, not some showy supercar or rare collector's edition. It was the right decision for a man who had done life his own, direct, powerful, and unyielding in one's refusal to conform. Many were shocked to see him emerge from his Tundra and make his way to a Santa Fe gas station. Not because the vehicle itself was noteworthy, but rather because it was shockingly mundane for an actor of his caliber. That, however, was the point for Hackman. A reliable mode of transportation that could take him where he wanted to go without drawing unnecessary attention to itself. One that could manage any terrain with ease. Hackman seems to have grasped a fundamental reality. Finding happiness and serenity is more important than amassing wealth. It was more than simply a means of conveyance that the Tundra served. As he stepped away from the limelight, it became a symbol of the lifestyle he had chosen. Living a life devoid of excess, free from the pressure to be grandiose, yet brimming with inner power and resolute resolve. In the same vein as the dude, despite the stage lights going out, Gene Hackman never quit pushing himself. He brought the same grit and imagination to his literary endeavors as he had to his acting career. Hackman published 5 books over the course of nearly 20 years, each of which reflected his profound view of human nature and history. His skill in creating realistic characters and worlds was on full display in his seafaring adventure Wake of the Perdido Star and his riveting love story Payback at Morning Peak. Notably, his trademark approach was on full display in the crime thriller Pursuit, which drew comparisons to his legendary performance in The French Connection and introduced new audiences to the great actor. Moving from digital to print was more than simply a shift of media. It was Hackman's method of sustaining his creative drive. He wasn't just a storyteller at heart. He used pen to paper to express himself. A man who knew what it was like to face adversity head-on, how to persevere, and how much he yearned for acknowledgement. Hackman said in an interview that writing gave him the creative freedom to tell his stories as he saw fit, unfettered by Hollywood's regulations. And his ability to motivate persisted throughout, showing that genuine creativity is everlasting. Hackman also painted, although he never let on about his hobby. Painting allowed him to let go and find equilibrium in his life. His desire to maintain his own space was highlighted when he previously expressed his desire for no one to see his artwork. Painting, in Hackman's view, needed no acclaim or notice. For a brief instant, he could forget about the pressures of being a Hollywood celebrity and just be himself. In a life that had always been shown in the limelight, he discovered an unusual calmness through this. Equally impressive was Hackman's devotion to athletics. He enjoyed a wide variety of sports, but football was his true passion. He was an avid Jacksonville Jaguars fan who would often attend games to show his support. Football was more than simply a pastime for Hackman. Participating in the sport allowed him to fully embrace the thrill it offered while also bringing him closer to the community. Even though Hackman is no longer with us, his legacy as the quintessential bad boy will live on in the hearts of his followers. Getting into a fight on a Hollywood street in 2001 was one of the most defining instances that demonstrated his resiliency. Hackman was involved in a collision with another vehicle while driving. A couple of young men emerged from the building, clearly agitated. However, rather than remaining composed, they started insulting Hackman, who happened to be a former Marine. Hackman, despite being 71 years old, was not easily intimidated. He responded with a punch without exchanging many words. In the midst of a packed street, the three men got into a fight, just before the cops showed there to disperse the altercation. Although no one was taken into custody, the episode further demonstrated that Hackman had his fighting spirit even after retiring from action films. However, Hackman may have had his most near-death experience in 2012. Unprotected, he was riding his bike in Florida when a truck slammed into him. As word of the catastrophe spread, people were understandably terrified. A lot of people were afraid he might be hurt bad, but nevertheless, Hackman managed to stay alive. His injuries were modest, therefore the hospital released him the very same day. Those closest to him said that he continued his regular cycling regimen well into old age. However, following the accident, he was much more careful and would never ride without a helmet. Something else happened that year that demonstrated how protective Hackman was of the people he cared about. He violently retaliated against a homeless man who had verbally threatened his wife Betsy as they strolled through Santa Fe. According to reports, Hackman defended his wife by slapping the man. Yet, no charges were filed, demonstrating his unwavering devotion to his family. Another accident befell Hackman later that year, when he was 82 years old, as he was riding his bike in the Florida Keys when a car crashed into him. He was taken to the hospital in a hurry, but he made a full recovery with no permanent disabilities. His remarkable resiliency and fortitude are once again demonstrated. When we consider Hackman's youth, we see that he was tough from the get-go. He joined the U.S. Marine Corps by falsely claiming to be 16 years old. Hackman, who was desperate to get away from his troubled family life, joined the military. However, the regimented lifestyle of the Marines was too much for someone as defiant as him. Because he refused to comply to strict rules, he constantly found himself in disciplinary trouble with his superiors. Regardless, he had incredible experiences in his job as a radio technician. Even during Mao Zedong's rule, he visited China among his many travels, by taking him to places and people he had never been before, expanding his horizons. However, there were some dull moments. He was in a terrible motorcycle accident once when he was involved in a collision with a tractor. Hackman shattered numerous bones in the crash and narrowly avoided death. Hackman decided the Marine Corps was not the right choice for him after he left. But those years were a crucial part of his turbulent path, and they molded his self-awareness. Difficult times, near misses, and ongoing struggles, both external and internal, characterized his existence. However, Hackman remained unfazed by hardship throughout. Gene Hackman remained more than just an accomplished actor despite the innumerable storms that life threw at him. His unwavering determination to triumph despite hardship was personified by him. He kept his head up through thick and thin, losing loved ones one by one, but never letting himself fall. Tragically, Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa passed away on February 26, 2025, leaving fans devastated and leaving a question unanswered. Despite this, each obstacle he faced only served to strengthen his resolve and drive him onward in his pursuit of artistic greatness. What gives someone the strength and vitality to leave in such hushed silence? However, his famous performances and profoundly moving words will endure as a lasting legacy. We will always remember him as a legendary fighter because he transformed every tragedy into an inspiring tale and every obstacle into an opportunity. Let us know what you think about Gene Hackman's extraordinary life in the space provided. Make sure to press that like button and subscribe if you're into stories like this so you can keep up with our adventures. To learn more about Gene Hackman's remarkable life story, click on the video that is currently playing on your screen.